Hey everybody, we should be starting any minute now. Anyone new to the channel, please like and subscribe.
Good morning, everyone. I will call the meeting to order. This is meeting number 122 of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts of the House of Commons.
Pursuant to the standing orders, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais rappeler à tous les députés et aux autres.
Before beginning, I would like to remind the participants online and in the room about the following important information.
And potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries. All in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from all microphones at the times.
Chair, point of order.
C'était juste parce qu'il fallait fermer le micro.
Mr. Sorbera's microphone is still open. I think it has to be closed, but it's been done. Thank you. You want me to begin again, or if not, I can continue? Oh, thank you.
The following measures have taken place to prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. Those new earpieces are black. Please ensure you use a black earpiece for those of you in the room. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of a meeting. If you plug it in, and then when you are not using it, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker, typically to your right, for this purpose that you'll find on the table as indicated. And please consult the cards if you have any questions or about the process. As you can see, the room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, especially our interpreters. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you, everyone, for your cooperation.
Usually addressed to the chair. Conformément à l'article 108.3 du règlement, le comité reprend.
Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3, we are resuming our consideration of ArriveCAN 1.
To highlight. You've all been sent, we've received correspondence from Mr. Paul Girard and his doctor. His condition makes him unable to attend at this time, and based, in my opinion, on the information provided, it'd be best to discharge the summons to allow the individual to focus on his physical health. In fact, I took it upon myself as chair to inform him of this last Friday. Could I seek consent of the committee to discharge the summons so it is not active or hanging over him? Yes. Very good. That is done. Thank you. Additionally, I'd like to assure members that per the motion adopted on Tuesday, they can expect a subcommittee report presented at each public committee meeting, full committee, which precedes a subcommittee meeting. I will note for the record as well that this actually will be the first time that the committee has requested this type of reporting in this Parliament, and I'm happy to work with the subcommittee to oblige and report back to the full committee. Members will notice that I have added some business after this meeting. This is optional. We can deal with most of this or all of this on Tuesday. And I would like to deal with one issue which involves the release of documents. Puis Madame Sinclair-Gagné, c'est une question qu'elle a pour...
Madame Sinclair-Gagné has a question for us about that.
Once we're done with our witnesses today, if we proceed to business, I will make a commitment to members that if we deal with that and then we want to adjourn, that I will vote to adjourn that meeting. So this is my commitment to you that there'll be, this won't turn into a lengthy meeting, because any other business that we have, we can deal with Tuesday. Now, you might still want to wrap it up, and that's fine. That's, of course, your decision. But I am committing, all I have is my word is my bond to you. My vote will be to adjourn that meeting should members want to adjourn without any other discussion if we're able to deal with the document question. And further, if we find we get into a long, lengthy discussion and members want to end the discussion, I will also vote to end the discussion. If we can wrap it up quickly, we will, and if we can't, we will end it. So my commitment to you is not to keep everyone here all afternoon. It is to try to resolve it quickly. So I'm telegraphing up front how I will vote on these to both not allow additional business unless the committee wishes it, and not to allow the debate to go on for hours and hours or for any lengthy period of time. So you can mull that over. I'd like now to welcome our witness as an individual, John Ossowski, Managing Director. And sir, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate it. And you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and then we'll turn to our questions. So over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will begin by taking issue with repeated references to me having lied, fibbed, or being demonstrably dishonest. I corrected my testimony last October, and I apologized for not remembering all those who attended a Teams meeting from 3 years ago. Mr. Chair, not remembering is not lying. What more does the committee want from me? On Tuesday, May 14th, it was further implied that as a result of my casual employment status with the CBSA that I was gaining some improper business advantage. The sole purpose of this arrangement is to facilitate my access to my emails, calendar, and get the support required to prepare for a committee appearance. Let me be clear, no business advantage has been sought or received as a result of this arrangement, and I have always followed all conflict of interest requirements of myself. I would now like to remind the committee of the exceptional circumstances we found ourselves in during the spring of 2020. We were shutting down the largest unprotected border in the world while trying to ensure that critical supply chains remained functional for the essential trade of food, medicine, personal protective equipment, etc. We had repatriation flights for Canadians returning home and had to manage a myriad of issues with the United States. Coordinating all of this with our U.S. counterparts and supporting the government in this historic time was my priority. ArriveCAN helped us administer the pandemic border measures, and I relied upon my officials to deal with the procurement details. With respect to the Auditor General's report, the agency has accepted the findings and put measures in place to ensure this type of situation doesn't happen again. As has been stated by the Auditor General, the rules were in place, but unfortunately it appears they were not always followed. I would now like to offer the following important context. Excuse me. We were asked by the Public Health Agency to develop the app to replace a paper process so they could get critical health information and pass that along to provinces in a timely manner. This was not planned for in any way. Certainly at the beginning, there was no budget, there was no project plan, or any of the other things we would normally have in place for the development of a tool like this. It was about responding as quickly as possible. And no one could have predicted at that time the dozens of versions that would be required to support the orders in council. Excuse me. Mr. Chair, mobile app expertise is a relatively new field for the government, and while the agency had some nascent capability, it was not sufficient, especially as the app changed frequently and became increasingly complex. While the Auditor General stated very clearly that at the outset getting outside support was reasonable, the value for money assessment appears to be partially based on the expectation that we should have hired public servants at less cost to do this work. I find this expectation downplays some important facts. First of all, these skills are in high demand, and the committee has heard that there is roughly a 30% vacancy in IT positions in the government, so I'm not sure we could have run a successful staffing process. Second, it takes months to hire somebody. Finally, with respect to funding, I would remind the committee that the agency absorbed a significant portion of these expenses and that there was no ongoing funding. While make or buy decisions are made by managers, hiring public servants with an ongoing source of funds is not considered a prudent management practice. To be clear, as the end of the pandemic was starting to come into sight and border volumes were increasing, what we needed was more border service officers, not app developers. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. We're going to begin our first round. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Ossowski, you were the president of the Canada Border Service Agency, is that correct? And how are you employed now?
I work with PricewaterhouseCoopers.
And what's your position with PricewaterhouseCoopers?
My classification is a managing director, but I'm a senior strategic advisor.
And as a senior strategic advisor, are you aware of how much business your firm does with the Government of Canada?
Yes.
And how much business is that?
I don't have those numbers with me today.
Okay. Would you care to offer an estimation of how much business it is?
That's corporate information that I'm not privy to share.
You're not privy to share it?
I'm privy to, but I'm not in a position to share. That's something for the firm to respond to that question.
So the value of contracts between your firm and the Government of Canada is not something that you're prepared to share with us?
That's not my information to share. That's the firm's
so,
information.
Sorry, I think it's germane, but we're going to circle back to it. We know that PricewaterhouseCoopers does significant business with the Government of Canada and formerly did business with the agency that you were the head of, the CBSA. You talked about taking a casual employment with the CBSA so that you could access information while you were concurrently working in a senior strategic advisory role for PricewaterhouseCoopers, a firm that does significant business with the Government of Canada, an amount so great and so sensitive you're not even prepared to disclose it to the committee today. Did you have any restraints put on you on the information that you were able to access when you were employed by the current president of the CBSA in preparation for your testimony before a parliamentary committee?
The letter of offer that was offered to me and I signed had conflict of interest provisions in it. I have access to my email on my calendar and other documents associated with events in the emails in the calendar.
So to be clear,
if I may finish,
the events
I recuse myself from all work with CBSA while at public work, PwC.
Yeah, we've seen the record of the CBSA under your leadership on conflicts of interest. We heard testimony from CBSA officials about boozy dinners with contractors that were working for the CBSA. So you'll have to excuse me if I don't put great stock in the seriousness with which you viewed the conflict of interest requirements that you said you would follow. You said that you had access to any documents related to items in your calendar and email. Well, as the president of the CBSA, I'd imagine that would be pretty significant. And working for a firm that hired the former head of the CBSA, having previously done business with the CBSA, and doing excess of tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in business with the Government of Canada, it seems that there would be a commercial advantage to having their senior advisor and executive with this firm to have access to all of their information from their calendar, emails, and associated documents when you were given that employment by Ms. O'Gorman. What date were you given access to the CBSA?
I don't recall the specific date. It was sometime in January initially to prepare for my January 18th, and then it was restarted again in February.
Can you please furnish this committee with the assigned offer of employment?
I believe that's in the possession of the agency. I don't have a copy of myself.
You don't have a copy of any of the employment documents, so you took a job with the CBSA and didn't keep a copy?
I'll look for it, but I think you're better off to get that from the agency. They would have a record of that.
Well, if you have it, I would be best to get it from you because we've asked for it from you.
I will look for it, and if I have it, I will certainly provide it.
Thank you. You still have 2 minutes. Pardon me, I was acknowledging the witness. You have 2 minutes.
Thanks very much. You were paid for your casual employment to access the documents in preparation for your testimony. That's correct?
I was asked to submit hours for my preparation, and I submitted 1 day.
And how much were you paid?
It was roughly $500.
So you were paid $500 to get access to internal files and documents, which I think I've already articulated is a highly questionable decision, and certainly raises ethical questions when based on your current employment and based on your employer's interest in the commercially sensitive information at the CBSA. Do you have a list of all of the documents, or are you still in possession of the documents that you retrieved in preparation for your committee appearance?
Mr. Chair, the one document that I was actually provided with, besides looking at my emails and calendars, was the ATIP that was provided to OGO, which is several hundred pages long, and I did not even look at it. I know that you asked Ms. O'Gorman for the forensics of what I've touched when I'm in there, and I'll leave it up to them to provide that information to you. I think you'll find it fairly underwhelming.
Well, I find it very interesting because the president of the CBSA said that you had access to any of the documents that you would have had access to as president of the CBSA.
While that may be the case, I did not access anything or take any advantage that would put me in any conflict of interest.
Yeah, I can't take it at face value, the seriousness with which you've approached the conflict of interest document that you signed, knowing the casual relationship with avoidance of a conflict of interest that your department had under your leadership. I mean, what better way for a big consulting firm to drum up new business with the CBSA when they've been cutting big checks with very little accountability than to have their former president, now employee, being able to get access to all of the documents that he had while working as the head of that
Mr.
agency.
Chair, I feel compelled to respond to this.
I'll allow it. Go ahead, yes.
Thank you. Given all that's gone on for this ArriveCAN discussion over the last couple of years, do you really believe that I would further put myself into jeopardy by pursuing something that had some conflict of interest?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take that question as rhetorical. Thank you. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ossowski, for coming in as a witness today. Did you want to add anything more to your statement that you just said?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. What role did you play in the development and oversight of the ArriveCAN app during your tenure as the president of the CBSA?
Obviously, as the president, I was running the agency during the pandemic. We had a request to develop the app from the Public Health Agency because of the paper process that was in place at the time. I asked my officials to look into it. They came up with the idea, and they went ahead and procured the necessary resources to deploy it.
And what role did you play in terms of oversight of the ArriveCAN app?
Certainly, as the accounting officer at the time, I was responsible for making sure that there was a system of controls in place. Those obviously are delegated down into the organization, and the specific responsibility was given to the CFO. But there's standard operating procedures. There was training before delegations were provided. There was managers' individual responsibilities to validate the work that was happening with their employees. And then there was sample audits and invoice checks that were done as part of the regular financial management process.
Did you have any involvement in the procurement process, specifically when it came to selecting contractors?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was not involved in any aspect of the vendor selection process or any aspects of the contracts whatsoever.
What role does the president of the CBSA generally play in the agency's procurement process?
Generally, I would only be involved in a procurement process if it required a Treasury Board submission or something that required a minister's approval.
Could you please explain to us why it was necessary for you to be rehired for the one day on a casual basis in order to prepare for your committee appearance?
Well, you can actually check my my emails on this, but I did not want necessarily to be paid for this. I simply wanted access to my computer emails and calendars so that I could prepare for the committee. As the committee is aware, relying on my memory in the first instance when I came to committee didn't work too well for me. So getting some facts and some clarity of my records was important for subsequent testimonies.
So do you know why they offered you this one-day contract of $500?
In order for someone to have access to the government account and check for their information, they need to be on strength. So I was offered a position so that I could access my emails and calendar.
And does this one-day contract also cover any expenses?
No.
Were there any expenses incurred in that one day?
Just personal expenses.
And this was in order to prepare for your appearance at the OGO committee on January 18th of this year?
Yes. Just to clarify, when I say personal expenses, that my personal well-being because of the time I spent preparing, but there was no expenses submitted to the agency.
So no personal or work expenses?
No.
And what you mentioned something about emails. you were looking for to support your appearance?
Yes.
Could you provide some more detail on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've gone to committee on 3 separate occasions before now, and as the committee's inquiries have progressed, they've asked for very precise, detailed information, and so it behooved me to be prepared for these types of questions, and in order to do that, I needed access to my emails to refresh my memory and make sure the committee was getting the most accurate information possible to continue their deliberations.
And in an earlier answer to your responsibilities as president of the CBSA, you mentioned that you also oversee sample audits.
No, I'd said that the agency would perform sample audits of invoices as part of the financial management process, and I think the CFO testified to that to you a couple of weeks ago in terms of the sampling that they did on invoices around ArriveCAN.
Why were you not rehired for your previous committee appearance on October 24th, 2023 and in 2022?
That's a good question. I probably, in retrospect, should have sought that support from the agency to prepare for those appearances.
So you mentioned support from the agency.
I mean,
elaborate a little bit more?
Access to my emails and just to get a correct record of events for the committee's use.
During your time as president of the CBSA, do you recall the agency providing support to past or current employees to aid their preparation for appearances at parliamentary committees?
I don't recall specifically, but it's not an uncommon practice, as Ms. O'Gorman pointed out the other day.
Chair, how much time do I have?
You're at 0, so if you have a quick question, I'll allow it, but you are spot on at that.
Okay, I'm just going to leave it then.
Thank you very much.
Mr.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Maintenant, c'est Madame Sinclair.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés, 6 minutes, please. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Ossowski, you are the managing director of your. Do you know many clients that you would pay $500 to so that they could look at their old email? I don't know any. So why would the taxpayer have to pay that kind of money, $500, so you could look at your email? Is that normal to you?
My best explanation of that would be, as a government employee, I was required to submit hours to the agency. I submitted 1 day's worth of hours, and they chose to give me a paycheck. So you can probably best get the answer in terms of the rules around that from the agency.
Pourquoi n'avez-vous pas refusé le $500?
Why didn't you refuse the $500, knowing that you were already employed by PricewaterhouseCoopers? Why didn't you say no? Why did you accept this exchange of money? Was it to protect the reputation of the CBSA or just to get something in exchange?
It was not to get anything in exchange. My initial response was that I did not want to get paid. They asked for my hours and they paid me. I'm happy to pay the money back.
Je pense que ce serait effectivement un bon début parce que effectivement.
Well, I think that would be a good start because why should the taxpayer pay for your preparation? You prepare for a committee knowing you will have to answer questions. According to the Globe and Mail, the Butler Agency gave to the CBSA, Mr. Hugh Dano more precisely, wrote about in September 2021 and April 2022. You were in position at that time. When did you first hear about Butler's complaints?
The first time that Butler made a complaint that I was aware of was during the committee proceedings and after I left the agency in the fall of 2022. This was well-trodden ground at the Government Operations Committee. I received no allegations, to be clear, from Butler during my tenure as president.
Et ça vous semble normal que des plaintes?
Does that seem normal to you, that complaints that triggered an inquiry, an investigation by the RCMP? Do you think that it was normal that you were doing your work as the head of the CBSA, but you didn't know about this type of important complaint?
Well, as I mentioned, the complaint didn't happen during my tenure. Ms. O'Gorman received the first complaint of allegations in the fall of 2022. I had retired. If something had happened during my tenure, I would have investigated and done what was ever required.
Well, the information we have is that the first complaints were September 2021, but you were in position at that time. It seems to me very strange that you weren't aware of it. All of this happened, you say, after you left. We heard in Ogo that from Mr. McDonald's testimony that it was Mr. Dohan who had left your office for GC strategies. He was responsible for the choice of GC strategies, and they had been competitors. That's just a small added fact I'm giving you. So why did you not set aside Deloitte?
Well, maybe I'll just answer. You have two questions there. One is that Mr. Utano testified at committee that the email that he received from Bottler in 2021 was around a pay issue, and they resolved it at his level. Nothing was brought to my attention. With respect to Mr. Dwan's testimony around the choice of GC strategies, he made it very clear that he was offered a choice between a technical managed service outsourcing option that Deloitte had put forward, and then something else that apparently had no reference to GC strategies on it. So I would refer you back to Mr. Dwan's testimony.
Mais je vous pose la question, Monsieur.
Yes, Mr. Dwan left your office and he indicated that Deloitte had been set aside. So then, if you were president of the CBSA, why are there so few details about complaints, whether it was Butler or a GC strategy? It seems to me that there is some sort of gap between the complaints from the suppliers and the important contract that wasn't competitive that was given to GC strategies for these persons who were working for your services. So it seems to me that you must have been in the decision-making loop. So why don't you have the details?
Well, I'm not sure what your reference is to Mr. Dwan leaving my office, but I've stated at multiple occasions at other committee appearances that Mr. Dwan never corresponded with me or provided me with asked me for any advice on anything to do with the contracts or the options with this. And so the testimony is there. The departmental records have been provided. There's thousands of pages of ATIP the committees have access to. I was not involved in the vendor selection process, and nothing was brought to my attention about allegations of wrongdoing by Bottler during my tenure.
Donc, seulement Monsieur.
So only Mr. Zutano, McDonald, and Duwan were involved in the selection of GC strategies. You were never informed about anything whatsoever with respect to GC strategies being selected for ArriveCAN. Never. Madame Sinclair? Please go ahead, Mr. Ossowski.
I was not involved in the vendor selection process. There's no record that I was involved in the vendor selection process. Mr. Dwan was offered a technical choice in terms of a managed service by Deloitte or a staff augmentation approach, and he's testified to that, and I believe you have all the documents around that. I was not involved in the vendor selection process in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you very much. Next up, suivant, it's Ms. Blaney. Nice to see you again. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's nice to have some time with you, Mr. Ossowski. So I think the biggest challenge, of course, is that Canadians living through so much and then being in a time of inflation and of cost of living crisis, seeing all of these resources out the door has really made a huge impact on them. And I think of, a lot of money, like $60 million in profits, would have made a huge difference in multiple ridings across the country to help people alleviate food insecurity, for one example. So I guess my first question to you is, this committee has heard valuable testimony from an earlier meeting with the National President of Customs and Immigration Union that frontline officers were never consulted on the development of the app or any of its 70 updates. And this really concerns me, especially as someone who works closely with people out on the front line, because they often have the most effective solutions because they're the ones doing the work. And I know that my colleague, Blake Desjardins, has also brought up this issue with the now president, Ms. Erin Gorman. But since you were the decision maker during the development of that, can you tell us why it is that frontline border officers weren't consulted for this app development?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to remember that when these changes happened, they were as a result of public health orders or orders in council. And so there was a necessary confidentiality until they came into force, where it was usually a very short time period, often less than 24 hours. And so before any changes happened, well, we would have sort of taken into account any feedback, excuse me, from the front line with respect to what was working or what wasn't and how to sort of make it more useful. We were not ever able to sort of disclose in advance what the upcoming changes was going to be, aside in that very short window to make sure that they were aware if a change in posture was required or some change in process was required.
Okay, so that's interesting to me. So it seems fascinating to me that there was no process in place. Like, I understand what you're saying about the confidentiality and all the requirements. But for me to look at the fact that there was 70 updates, it seems like there was no process during this time where you actually selected some frontline workers to help you be guided. And when you see the background of this app, it failed again and again, like it was all over the media. So I'm just wondering, is there no process internally that you had to actually work with frontline folks that deliver the service, that often are the ones who could give you the most effective information? And there was no strategizing internally about how to do that work in what I understand is a dire circumstance. But I would also say that during a dire circumstance, that's when you want to get it right the most. And it doesn't seem like that was in any way a priority.
Mr. Chair, I would say that we had regular meetings with the union. We were in constant contact with our frontline officers and the regions during the pandemic. Anything that wasn't working, we tried to take into account to make sure that the border process would be as smooth as possible. And I would remind you that, the officers themselves were vulnerable here. This was, especially in the very early days when little was known about how the disease was transmitted in paper processes. We were very concerned with the front line and the personal protective posture that they had as they did their duties to sort of ensure the flow of people that were entering back into the country. So we did our best to consult with them. But at the end of the day, there was very tight timelines, and because of necessary confidentiality around public health orders or orders in council, we weren't able always to do it as fulsome as we might have wanted to.
Okay, so we also heard from Mr. Weber, the president of the union, that the CBSA was short-staffed by about 2,000 to 3,000 workers prior to the beginning of the pandemic, which gave way for the need for an application in the first place, which I think tells you if you're not working on the ground when crisis strikes, then you really have a problem. So this is devastating to understand. So it gave way to the application in the first place, and that the funds allocated to the ArriveCAN app could have hired like 500 officers instead. So I understand that we were in the middle of a pandemic, but I'm wondering if there's any reflection on what happened prior to the pandemic and how not having enough people trained and ready has created this crisis where we've seen a huge amount of taxpayer dollars go to someone out there who's walking away with a huge amount of profit when the app didn't even work. And we could have seen officers on the ground providing services, doing it safely if there was planning put into place. So I'm just wondering if there's any reflections on making sure that you maybe listen to the union, and when there's not enough people to do the job, that is rectified.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I would say that we would hire as many border service officers as we could afford to do so. It's as simple as that. We are always trying to rebalance the workforce in terms of retirements, attrition, workload, changes in volumes. But to be clear, the purpose of the app was not to replace officers. The purpose of the app was to collect healthcare information from individuals so that it could be passed along to the provincial authorities and for the public health agency to use in understanding how the virus was circulating around the globe. So they're mutually exclusive in that regard.
Thank you very much. Beginning our second round, Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Current CBSA President O'Gorman and suspended or on medical leave Min Doan, a senior executive at CBSA, have been caught repeatedly lying to this committee and other committees. In fact, the RCMP are investigating currently Min Doan's allegations that he deleted purposely tens of thousands of emails over a 4-year period. Are you aware of that, sir?
I'm aware of what's been said at committee about this, but I have no other details.
Right. And did you ever engage in that type of activity when you had access to your own emails after leaving the agency? Did you delete some of your emails?
Mr. Chair, I've always honored whatever information management, document management principles that were imposed on me by the government. So no, I have not inappropriately deleted any emails.
Thank you. Any and all emails relating to your communications with Min Doan or your communications with GC Strategies or anything in relation to the ArriveCAN or Bottler AI would be preserved at the CBSA. Is that what you're saying, sir?
Mr. Chair, I've reviewed my emails and I have no evidence that anything has been changed or removed from what I remember.
Thank you. Now let's end this speculation once and for all. There's fairly clear evidence on the record at this committee and other committees that it was in fact Min Doan who finally made the decision to select GC Strategies. Do you agree with that?
I would go back to Mr. Dwan's testimony, Mr. Chair, and he said he was
Dewan's,
offered a technical decision.
Sir, Mr. Dewan's testimony is rife with inconsistencies and outright lies. There is evidence from other witnesses, including written evidence, which clearly supports that there was one person who was in charge at the time at CBSA, and it was Min Doan who held that position and who ultimately selected GC Strategies. I'm asking you, sir, do you agree with that or not?
I do not agree with that.
Fine. The RCMP, as I said, are investigating this and a number of other issues surrounding the CBSA and other agencies. Has the RCMP contacted you, sir? Have they requested any documentation from you?
Mr. Chair, no, they have not.
Will you cooperate with them when and if they decide to talk to you?
Mr. Chair, absolutely.
The president of the CBSA, Aaron O'Gorman, appeared 2 days ago and was quite clear that there was only one casual employee contract that was offered to you, and that was in relation to the one-day contract that we spoke about. But that's not accurate. That's not accurate at all. In fact, you've received more than one contract since you left the CBSA. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Chair, the initial contract that occurred was for my appearance on January 18th. After we closed out that contract, I was invited back to OGO in February, but it didn't work out for scheduling reasons. And so that contract was restarted. So under her, I believe what she said, under her tenure, it's only happened once, and maybe it was just referring to me once, but in fact, there was 2 separate contracts. And they're not, actually, I think I would just clarify, they're not contracts. I'm on casual employment status.
Did you in fact sign a contract in relation to your appearance today?
I signed a casual employment letter of offer.
Okay, and how much are you receiving?
Nothing.
Nothing. All right, now in relation to the documentation, you claim you only accessed your emails and your calendars, but again, that's not accurate because you had access literally to everything at the CBSA surrounding this scandal. Isn't that correct, sir?
I guess, Mr. Chair, notionally, I guess that would be the case, but
Right.
you've asked the department for records of what I've accessed, and I
Yes.
think you'll find it
Well,
underwhelming.
Ms. O'Gorman was asked the question 2 days ago, what documentation did you receive? She very curtly said, well, I don't know, you have to ask Mr. Ossowski. So we're asking you, isn't it true that Ms. O'Gorman actually furnished you with a number of documents in relation to your committee's appearances, including the statement of allegations against Mr. McDonald and Mr. Utano?
Mr. Chair, Ms. O'Gorman has personally not provided me with any information, and I have never seen the statement of fact or allegations against Mr. Utano or Mr. McDonald.
So if there were emails from Ms. O'Gorman to you, including attachments with documentation regarding the statement of fact against Mr. McDonald, Mr. Utano, you would disagree with the existence of an email. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I have no knowledge of any emails from Ms. O'Gorman
That is your
about
time,
the
Mr.
statement
Brock.
of fact or allegations.
Thank you very much. Next up, Mr. Sabera, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. Welcome, and good morning to everyone. Mr. Ossowski, welcome to the committee today, and thank you for availing yourself and answering the questions that have been posed. Before I begin into my line of questioning, is there anything, John, if I can just refer to you by your first name, is there anything you'd like to add to date in terms of the question that you've answered from any of my colleagues, any clarification or anything you wish to extend on?
Thank you for the offer. I think I'm fine for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John, in your comments to date, Mr. Ossowski, you've commented that as CBSA president, you were not involved in the vendor selection process. Can you elaborate further, please?
As I say, generally speaking, as a deputy minister, I would only get involved in a contracting process if it required ministerial authority or briefing and or a Treasury Board submission, and none of those occurred in this case.
Okay. I'm a recent member of this committee, and I know there's been many questions asked on this issue. Mr. Ossowski, from a professional background, how long have you been, or were you involved in terms of working in the public service?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I spent just over 32 years in the government. I worked as a deputy minister in the deputy minister ranks for 10 years, serving both the Conservative and Liberal parties.
So you have served under both administrations as a deputy minister in that role?
In the deputy minister ranks, yes.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Ossowski, and thank you for your service to the Government of Canada and obviously its citizens. In terms of, with your experience in going into when the pandemic happened, obviously it was what we call a once-in-a-lifetime event, hopefully not to be repeated anytime soon. And in terms of the challenges of ramping down and then ramping up and the staffing challenges that you saw and obviously were intricately involved in just because of the nature of what was happening. Can you comment on that, about the early days of the pandemic, what you were seeing?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think when you go back and you look at your emails, you see the complexity of the environment that was happening at the time. And we had to, as I mentioned, to deal with fear in our own workforce around our frontline officers and the exposure that they might had. Despite their training, there was a lot of unknowns and there was a lot of hesitancy in terms of what was coming. We were constantly readjusting our resources. We were shutting down the largest unprotected border in the world. It took a lot of effort to coordinate with our U.S. colleagues to make sure that there would be continued flow of certainly food and medicine and supplies in and out of the country. It required a great deal of cooperation from everybody involved, and it was a hands-on 24/7 environment until we faced whatever the next change that was happening. So there was remarkable flexibility on behalf of the workforce and all of my colleagues in other departments to do the best we could. There was no playbook. And in fact, I was reading in the paper today fears of avian flu and another potential pandemic, and I hope that there's a lot of lessons learned here in terms of what the future might hold for us in terms of how we would respond to a situation like that.
No, and of course, and I think sometimes we need to remind ourselves that nearly 60,000 Canadians died of COVID-19 during the pandemic, and I think it behooves us to remember that we needed the government to marshal all the resources, but via the various agencies, including CBSA, to protect Canadians, but also to protect our economy, so we could snap back out as soon as possible and ramp back up, in which we did. Mr. Ossowski, there's been much mention. You hear this, I think, from folks in terms of your role in the CBSA, but then in terms of meeting with vendors, third-party suppliers. So there's an RFP which goes out at all levels of government and stuff. How would you characterize when you would meet or not meet with contractors and subcontractors, and would it be only within the work purview or outside of the work purview?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Certainly it was only ever in the work purview unless there was some sort of event that I was at that, vendors were present. But in terms of people pitching me, that happened very infrequently. In terms of me directly, usually that was handled within other parts of the organization.
Okay. No, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Ossowski. Chair, how much time do I have left?
Time for one more. You're right on spot, but go ahead, please. We have a short one.
Okay. No, thank you very much. And in terms of the rollout of the ArriveCAN app, and in terms of that app process, is there anything in hindsight or anything that you think we could have done differently regarding the development oversight of the application?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I think, first of all, it's important to understand, and the Auditor General said it was reasonable to go and get outside help at the beginning, but this procurement vehicle that we used was the only option that was available to us. Speed was of the essence. It was the quickest way to ramp up our capacity to deliver a very simple app at the beginning to replace a piece of paper with people's basic tombstone information, biographical information. As you've heard from others, in retrospect, yes, there should have been financial coding set up right at the very beginning so that we could have tracked the expenses more carefully. But I want to remind the committee, as I said in my opening remarks, all the rules were in place. It appears, unfortunately, they were not always followed, so I make no excuses for the lack of documentation and the other things that the Auditor General found in her study. That's not acceptable. That should not have happened. And I'm sure that as we move forward, the agency's putting in measures to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est
Thank
Madame.
you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Ossowski.
Suivant, puis c'est Madame.
Madame Sinclair, de Gagné, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to follow on this last point. When you were the president of the CBSA, there were events that occurred that were devastating, but there were many poorly documented information papers. There was no information passed on to whoever needed to know about things in the agency. Do you think, given this type of situation, that you did a good job as head of the CBSA?
Mr. Chair, I always tried to do the best I could possibly do.
D'accord.
Okay. Now, if you were in my shoes, and if we were to change places, would you say I would be right to say that the president of the CBSA did not do her job well because of the what was in the report by the Auditor General? Would you agree?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So obviously, as the person responsible for the day-to-day agency, responsible to the minister of the day for the running of the agency, In hindsight, yes, there are lessons learned, and if I could roll back the clock, there would have been some changes. But I remain proud of the work that I did and that my team did during the pandemic.
Passons maintenant.
Well, let's move to another subject, which is perhaps more interesting. ArriveCAN demonstrates it's really merely the tip of the iceberg in terms of the size of the problem. Mr. Ossowski, given what the amounts that were paid out to various businesses, that's already exploded. We're aware of that. But we do know as well that at the end of your tenure, about 20% of contracts were awarded non-competitively. Were you aware of this fact, and how was control lost at the CBSA?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. I have no recollection of the percentages of contracts that were awarded competitively or non-competitively. Obviously, if something's valued under whatever the threshold is, I think it's $25,000, then it would be awarded non-competitively. So
yes, I know the rules. Your time is up.
You have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I found it interesting that you just, Mr. Ossowski just said that he's proud of the work that happened around the app. And it is shocking to me that would be your testimony. And I understand it was also your previous testimony in OGO. It's an app that cost millions of dollars to Canadian taxpayers, and now we're spending a lot of time trying to get to the bottom of this. So if that is your opinion, I'm just curious if, you talked about doing things differently. If you could go back, what would you change if you could restart this process?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Look, there was no choice but to develop an app. It was clear that the Public Health Agency needed a better way to collect this information. I am proud of the way the agency responded. Obviously, I'm basing it on what I knew then versus what is being revealed now. And the app was still the right answer to the challenge that we had. It facilitated our ability to manage the border, and it will continue to facilitate in its new form legitimate travel and trade across the country. And other countries are using similar approaches. So in terms of what was spent, that's the debate of the procurement system. And people are looking at that in terms of how to manage that better. But it was the only option available to us at the time to procure these outside resources to help us build the app.
So through the chair, my next question is, were you aware of the initial allegations of misconduct made by Butler AI?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I've answered, those allegations did not come to the agency, as Ms. O'Gorman has testified, until the fall of 2022, and I had already retired at that point in time.
So looking back, do you see any serious concerns with internal processes and mechanisms? Because that didn't come up. Is there something that you would do differently?
Mr. Chair, if the allegations of wrongdoing had been brought to my attention, I would have done something about it, but they were not.
You have time for one quick one, Ms. Blaney, if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Chair. So through the chair, that goes back to the question that I asked, though. It wasn't brought to your attention. What mechanisms need to change so it could be brought to the attention of this important role?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Dutt was free to email me directly, and she did not. So my officials dealt with her complaints, or Ms. O'Gorman dealt with her subsequent issue around the complaint. But Mr. Utano had testified that the first issue that he received from Ms. Dutt was around pay, and it was not about a complaint per se that needed any further investigation, and it was certainly not brought to my attention.
Thank you very much. Next up, Ms. Block, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I echo my colleagues' comments when it comes to the fact that it is absolutely mind-boggling to have the former president of the CBSA state he remains proud of the work his department undertook, when it is actually the CBSA that has served as a bellwether for the complete debacle we are studying now, known as ArriveScam, and all of the other issues that have started to arise when it comes to procurement and contracting across all departments in the Government of Canada. I'm going to circle back to some of the questions my colleague Mr. Barrett asked, just to make sure that I heard your answers correctly, Mr. Ossowski. When appearing before the Government Operations and Estimates Committee, and I'll start by restating, the umbrage you seem to have taken or are taking with the fact that individuals have accused you of lying when you came to committee. And yet when you appeared before the Government Operations and Estimates Committee, you did lie about ever meeting Christian Firth. You did not say, I do not recall, when the question was asked of you. You gave a definitive no. And we have that in the testimony. And as we know, at a subsequent meeting, you then corrected the record to say that you had in fact met with him. You stated that you were able to make the correction because the CBSA paid you to provide you with a document stating that you had in fact held this meeting. And I think most Canadians would find it strange that a former employee gets rehired as a casual employee under a temporary contract to gain access to information needed to correct the record or defend themselves, when most people pay to get access to information from the Government of Canada through ATIPs. So from your earlier response, are we to understand that this is a common practice? People getting hired to gain access to information so they can defend themselves?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. Let's be very clear here. When I originally answered no, I
sign off on any of the contracts that are in question today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I don't believe the minister was ever required to sign off on any of these contracts.
And when we're talking about your involvement with these three companies, does this date to pre-COVID or pre-ArriveCAN? Have you had interactions with these organizations that we're talking about today prior to COVID?
Mr. Chair, which three companies?
We're talking about Daly, we're talking about the ones that are associated with the ArriveCAN app.
Thank you, Mr.
The
Chair.
contractors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, the only interaction was the well-noted one with GC Strategies and the Bottler interaction.
And what kind of interaction did you have with them pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID? I'd have to go back and check the dates specifically, but there's a record, I believe, on the Government Operations Committee where I was initially approached while there was an opportunity to use a tool that Bottler had developed, and then there was a subsequent meeting, a Teams meeting, which Mr. Firth attended, where I was actually pitched on the approach, and I think that was during the pandemic. It was not before the pandemic.
Okay. And when you do interact with them, how do you conduct yourself, and how does your department conduct yourself when you're dealing with companies like this?
Mr. Chair, if I'm being given a demonstration of something, I pay attention to the demonstration and I ask questions. It's as simple as that.
Okay, so can we just turn to now how you've engaged with Christian Firth of GC Strategies? Can we talk about the famous or the infamous whiskey, whatever it is, that the organization or event that had happened? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Mr. Chair, I have no knowledge of that event aside from what's been revealed during these proceedings.
So have you met with Christian Firth before?
Mr. Chair, I have never met Mr. Christian Firth. He was at one Teams meeting when I was being presented with the Bottler AI solution. He had no speaking role in the meeting. I don't recall ever even him being at the meeting to this day.
And have you met with any of his organization's contractors or subcontractors in an outside setting beyond the work that was being done?
Mr. Chair, I have no recollection of meeting any of these contractors in or outside of the workplace. Caveat that by saying that there was a recognition event for the team that was working on the app, so there may have been contractors present at that, but that was a virtual thank you for people that have been working very hard to get the app out the door.
And were you aware of CBSA employees that had been hanging out with GC Strategies and their contractors, et cetera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I was never brought to my attention.
Okay. And is there anything that you would like to add? I mean, you know what? I understand and appreciate it. I really want to thank the CBSA and the officers that were on the front lines for what is the most difficult time that Canada has gone through in a very, very long time with COVID-19. And our CBSA officers were there. They were supportive. They were trying to make sure that Canadians were protected. And going through all of this, just to reframe what exactly it is that we're doing, we're talking about an ArriveCAN app that we think cost too much money. It is not about the fact that the app was not effective or that it didn't work or that it was not helpful to Canadians. It is literally about the fact that it cost too much money and how that procurement process happened. So I just want to differentiate between the work that our CBSA officers do and what had happened here with the ArriveCAN app. So, Mr. Ossowski, I'll leave you with our last words if there's anything that you would want to add to that.
Thank you. As I say, I am and I remain proud of the way the agency responded during the pandemic. There was obviously lessons learned around the app and the procurement process that everyone regrets and wishes that had not been the case. They're being corrected, and the agency will be in a better posture to deal with whatever curveballs that gets thrown down the road. And if I could just go back, Mr. Chair, if there's some time, just to clarify with Ms. Blocks and
actually, we're well over the time.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll have a chance to come back to that. I appreciate you have a lot to say, and that's why we're just going to begin our third round. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Did you have access to the binder prepared for CBSA President O'Gorman before her appearance at committee in either an electronic format or in a paper format?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have not accessed or seen or been sent any briefing materials for Ms. O'Gorman's use.
Was one offered? Was any of that material offered to you?
In terms of her briefing book?
Any preparation material that was used or designed for the use of the current president of the CBSA?
The only thing that I recall is around our January 18th appearance where we appeared together, we exchanged opening statements in advance.
How far in advance?
I think the day before.
That's interesting. Ms. O'Gorman made a point in her appearance this week of saying that there was no effort for anyone to get their stories straight, but certainly witnesses, a former employee of the government and a current head of an agency exchanging opening statements days prior to their appearance at committee looks like exactly that. When you accessed files or resources of the CBSA while in your casual employment status, where did you do that? From what location?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was no intent to get our stories straight. It was a courtesy to share opening remarks.
The question, sir.
The answer to the question is I access these emails in my calendar through a laptop at my home.
Did you attend a CBSA office to receive the laptop or sign the offer of employment?
Yes, I went to the office to receive the laptop and signed my letter of employment.
Which campus?
At the office, the headquarters on Laurier Avenue.
Were you an employee of, PricewaterhouseCoopers on the date that you had access to the CBSA materials? Were you also being paid by PricewaterhouseCoopers on the same day that you were being paid by the Government of Canada?
I don't even remember the exact day that I was billed for, or potentially yes. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds like a yes. We've heard a lot about double dipping, where we have folks who are providing services to the Government of Canada while also working for the Government of Canada. We know that PricewaterhouseCoopers does hundreds of millions of dollars in business with the government. It's the fact that this is just further evidence of the disregard for the public dollar in the ongoing scandal of double dipping is it's unsurprising, of course, but troubling for Canadians. You said you were proud of ArriveCAN. I've talked to frontline border service officers, and I speak to them regularly. I spoke to them during the time that you talk about, the challenging time of 2020, 2021, 2022, and time since then. This cost $60 million, and it wasn't necessary. It absolutely was not necessary. You said that you would have spent more on hiring border service officers if you had money to do it, but you had the money. And the border service officers have been very clear with me that they could have done, with resources made available to them, more than was done with the app, but also been able to do the job that they're there to do, to make sure that the traveling public is safe, to make sure that we have the proper flow of commerce into our country. And they, instead, scammers and grifters were paid. Pools and decks were put on the houses of of contractors who added no value to this app, charging 30% commissions and bonuses paid to executives, while border services officers were able to execute on their core function. So to be clear, you're proud of the $60 million price tag on the app.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I take umbrage that I'm being referred to as double dipping to prepare for this committee.
Sir.
And secondly, there was no ongoing source of funds to hire border service officers, and my point in my opening remarks was
Mr. Ossowski, you spent $60 million on this thing, so there were funds. There were funds available. You made a choice, and the choice was to spend it, and we in the way that you did, and 30% commissions going to people who added no value. You talk about programmers.
Your question, Mr. Barrett.
Christian Firth and Darren Anthony, they're not programmers, but the people who.
Question.
Are you proud of doing business with these grifters instead of properly funding frontline border service officers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was no choice at the time to use this procurement vehicle.
It's a failure of leadership.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est M. Drouin. Vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Drouin, 5 minutes.
For being here, and I certainly don't want to comment on PwC. It is a respectable firm that has done business with the Government of Canada under red leadership and under blue leadership, and I think it's unfair the way we or certain members are treating your relationship with PwC. It has nothing to do with the issue at hand. I want to go back to early days of the pandemic when CBSA was seized with borders that were closed. And you obviously, what was the rationale and the thinking behind when borders are closed? Were you able to predict everything that was going to happen when a border is closed?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. It is a profoundly complicated and blunt process to shut down the border. As you may recall, at the very beginning, at some point in the beginning of the pandemic, only Canadian citizens were allowed to return home. I had border service officers who were married to U.S. folks, U.S. border service officers, in fact, that could not go back home or could not come cross with their family members because they were not Canadian citizens. This was very hard at a personal level for everyone involved in terms of, for lack of better words, the rough justice that was required to manage and contain the spread of the virus. So we did the best we could. We had established criteria. We had to make adjustments all the time. I had a full-time 24/7 border operations center trying to apply judgment in tricky situations that couldn't be anticipated. It was incredibly complicated and stressful. And I am proud of the way the agency responded in that, because it was hard on everyone, but at the end of the day, it was the right thing to do.
And I recall even truck drivers weren't sure at the time whether or not they were insured if they were crossing the border for commercial purposes. I've had several chats with constituents at the time. And I want to go back to developing an app where there's no time to test properly, to release slowly to the public. Just talk about, and I don't know if you have general experience in developing an application, but there's been a lot of accusation made towards the app should have cost $84,000 only. I'm just wondering, with other applications across the IT space, there's hosting costs. The more customers or the more clients sign on, there is a cost to that. Can you elaborate on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, often people have referred to the fact that it blew past its $80,000 budget. There was no budget. It happened to be the $80,000 is what they estimated the cost of the first release of the app was. After that, now the Auditor General has said there was 177 versions, excuse me, of the app. Each of those apps required incredible efforts to put together. It required cloud service access to support it. It required security work to be done to it. It required a call center for people to access. It required a web-based version. It had to go, excuse me, it had to go through the app stores to be vetted before it was released. The time frames were incredibly tight. The user testing was not always able to be done in time. Obviously, there was one big error where folks were put into quarantine that should not have been put into quarantine, and we apologize for that. But this was a very sophisticated tool, and I've seen no credible evidence from any witness to say that they could have done it much less expensive than this, notwithstanding the procurement issues at play. This was a very complicated app, many different versions that were not able to be predicted in advance. And we were always playing catch up, quite frankly, to see what the art of the possible was for what the public health agency needed to do to manage the virus properly.
Just for the record again, you had no direct involvement in signing the ArriveCAN contract at all?
I was not involved in the contracting process in any way, shape, or form.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair de Gagné encore.
Ms. Sinclair de Gagné, 2.5 minutes. Don't be surprised if I don't agree with you, but I will not insult you like some have done. Now, let me get to my last question, Mr. Ossowski. If you had known that employees or public servants were had golf tournaments and were going to whiskey tastings or going to restaurants, what would you have done? Would you have fired them? Would you have let them go if they didn't declare that to you?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. If in fact it had been brought to my attention, there would have likely been an investigation, and if wrongdoing was found to have happened, there's a range of penalties that could have been applied to the person.
Monsieur Ossowski, avec ce que l'on sait.
With what we know now, do you think that that was bad behavior on their part, accepting gifts of very expensive whiskey and so on? You're not going to tell me, I hope, now that that wasn't something bad on their part.
Chair, the Code of Conduct is very clear on this, that if an employee receives an offer, they're supposed to report it, and it would not be something that I would expect that they would do.
I understand. What would your decision have been then, had you known about this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if one of my direct reports had said that they'd received an offer such as this, I would have hoped that they would have said that they turned it down. If they had not, then we would have had further inquiries.
Donc, vous refusez de répondre à la question. D'accord.
You're refusing to answer my question. Okay. You're here as a citizen, and I find it a bit odd that you're refusing to answer my question because you were president of the agency. You have the opportunity now to say that had you known, you would have taken action. There would have been reprimands, but yet you are refusing to answer the question. I find that to be too bad. Now, as a citizen, and that is why you are here, as an individual, the CBSA employees participated in things like that, are still in the employment of the agency. Do you think that's normal? And I'd like a specific answer, please, yes or no.
Mr. Chair, I did answer the question. There is a code of conduct. Employees are to report offers of hospitality like this. If they have if they have not done so, and then that needs to be investigated and they need to be reprimanded.
Et voilà. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Floor, nice to see you, sir. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning, bright and early, out here in British Columbia. I sit on the International Trade Committee, and we've studied the ArriveCAN situation from the perspective of how it affected movement and trade across the border. Here we are today talking more about the financial misdoings, I would say, and all of this irresponsibility, in addition to the facts that the Auditor General has brought to light, leads me to believe that there was misconduct, or at the very least, some terrible management practices at the highest level of CBSA. There was no formal agreement between PHAC and CBSA between April 2020 and July 2021 to clarify roles and responsibilities. In the absence of a designated lead, good project management practices such as developing project objectives and goals, budgets, cost estimates, risk management activities weren't carried out. And there was a lack of financial record keeping. Eventually it became impossible to have a check and balance system. So my just simple overall question is, wouldn't you say that in the end that this is your legacy and CBSA under your tenure is responsible for this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's lots of regrets here around things that the Auditor General and others have found out about how this happened. I would say, as I said in my opening remarks, this was an emergency situation. Eventually, we did have an agreement with the Public Health Agency, who was the business owner of the app. There should have been better documentation. There should have been better recognition of the controls and procedures. And I regret that that happened under my watch. I hope that's not my sole legacy as the president of the CBSA.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have Mr. Brock for 5 minutes, please.
You said Mindone didn't choose GC Strategies. Who did?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. This has come up multiple times.
Just give me a name, sir.
I think the question, Mr. Chair, is the issue is really who proposed GC
Just
Strategies.
a name, sir. Who ultimately signed off and chose GC Strategies? It's a simple question. I want a simple answer.
Point of order, Chair. Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Sabero, I believe.
I wanted to get your attention there. I think the line, the tone of questioning from my colleague on the opposition side, we've had a really good meeting to date, and the tone of question, the start off here is kind of veered off somewhere where it's, if I can use the word disrespectful, I think that'd be probably apt.
Well, I don't think it's disrespectful. It's certainly sharp, but that is Mr. Brock's within Mr. Brock's parameters or ability to decide how he'd like to question the witness. But it has certainly been respectful. Mr. Brock, you have 4 minutes, 40 seconds.
What's the name, please?
Mr. Chair, I do not know who chose GC Strategies. The Auditor General is also not able to determine who chose GC Strategies.
Thank you, sir. This is my time. For the record, the president of the CBSA, an extremely large ministry, is unable to give evidence to this committee as to who ultimately chose GC Strategies. That's absolutely incredible, sir. Moving on. I want you to table all emails and attachments sent to you by Aaron O'Gorman since you left the agency within 3 weeks. A document tabled by the CBSA called Lessons...
Hold on. I want to get an acknowledgement from the witness if he's prepared to do that. Generally, and I'm sure you're aware of this, committees can request, or members through committees can request information. Is that something you'd be prepared to provide to us or get back to us on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're asking for all emails that I received from Ms. O'Gorman.
Is that correct, Mr. Brock? I have stopped the clock.
Emails, all attachments, any other pieces of correspondence since you left the agency.
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brock. You have 4 minutes.
Now, there's a document that came out of the Auditor General's report from the CBSA called Lessons Learned. A highlight and a conclusion of that document indicates that a central governance authority was needed. You previously said that you briefed ministers and cabinet during your tenure as president. Did you raise that issue with them?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not aware of the document that Mr. Block is referring to.
I'm asking about the concept of a central governance authority. Did you raise that with ministers and cabinet?
I have no recollection of raising that with ministers or cabinet.
Did you advocate for this?
Mr. Chair, I don't even know what the reference is without looking at the document and seeing how it's been explained.
If it's not you and if it's not current President O'Gorman, who is it?
Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to review the document if the member would like to provide it to me.
Is it likely the Minister of Public Safety?
Again, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to review the document if the member would provide it to me.
Given everything that has transpired with this scandal, do you think it's highly appropriate for this committee, if not other committees, to have former Minister of Public Safety Marco Mendocino testify on these issues?
Mr. Chair, I have no opinion on what the committee chooses to do in terms of who it calls for witnesses.
Do you think he has relevant information?
Mr. Chair, I have no comment on who would provide relevant
Well, Marco
information.
Mendocino essentially said to Mindone that someone's head should be on a platter with respect to the controversy surrounding GC strategies. Were you aware of that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe those comments and that testimony happened after I left the agency.
All right. Now, are you surprised? I know how proud you are of the work that you did and the value that you claim that was delivered to Canadians against the backdrop of all the scandals, against the backdrop of a very damning Auditor General report about the mismanagement at the CBSA under your leadership. Are you actually surprised now that the RCMP is actively investigating not only the ArriveCAN debacle, but circumstances surrounding GC strategies?
Mr. Chair, I look forward to the outcome of the RCMP's investigation.
The question is, are you surprised? Do you think it's appropriate that the RCMP is investigating criminality surrounding ArriveCAN contracting under your leadership and the very fraudulent and forged practices exhibited by GC strategies? Does it surprise you?
Mr. Chair, I think that an unbiased, thoughtful, fulsome investigation is warranted.
How much time do I have left, Chair?
Just under a minute.
The procurement ombudsman found that Justin Trudeau's government favored McKinsey Contracting, a Liberal-connected firm with over $100 million in government contracts. In one case, the CBSA saw that McKinsey had not applied for a contract under your leadership, sir, so the CBSA revised the statement of work with no documentation explanation allowing McKinsey to qualify. Were you part of that decision?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no recollection of being involved in the contracting around McKinsey.
Okay. How many millions of dollars under your leadership was awarded to McKinsey?
Mr. Chair, I have no recollection of how much was spent with McKinsey.
Okay. Will you table that information? Will you ask Aaron O'Gorman to assist you in tabling that information?
I think that question is better posed to the department, to the agency.
Would you, I'm putting it to you, sir, because I don't know when Ms. O'Gorman is attending again. Will you undertake to speak with Ms. O'Gorman, because the McKinsey contracts were under your leadership? Will you undertake to speak with her and give this committee a number of how many millions of dollars in contracts under your leadership was awarded McKinsey Contracting? Perhaps ask
Thank you, Mr. Brock. Hold on, Mr. Brock. Just hold on. Your time is up. I gave you more time because you're trying to get information. I allowed that. I will allow the witness to answer, and then we'll go to Ms. Yip. But
I am here as an individual. I'm sure Ms. O'Gorman has officials watching the testimony today and taking note of the request.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Sure. Just a quick point of order and follow-up to Mr. Brock's questions.
Yes.
Mr. Ossowski kind of repeatedly gave the answer that he has no recollection of that. I assume there would be agreement of the committee to ask him to provide clear yes or no answers to the matters which he claimed no recollection of, and to follow up.
Mr. Jennings, you're a skilled parliamentarian. Witnesses are here to answer questions, and members are free to pose them. I cannot compel answers. If there's business to take up after, we can do that. I'm going to turn now to Ms. Yip for
point of order, Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, just the chair of standing committees can certainly compel certainly compel answers from.
Sorry, pardon me. We are getting answers from the witness. If you don't like that, we can take it up later. I'm going to turn now to Ms. Yip. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Ossowski, I believe you had wanted to provide us with clarification during Ms. Block's testimony. Question, sorry.
Just 1 second. Is the mic clear on everyone? It was awfully low, but I just want to make sure. Could you hear that okay, Mr. Ossowski, from Ms. Yip?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Please proceed. I did stop the clock. You've got 4:45. Go ahead, please,
Thank
sir.
you, Mr. Chair. So just to go over this again, when I initially replied to Mr. Barrett's question in December of 2022, I did so without, as an individual, with no support of the department, with no access to my information. Mr. Curry subsequently found out that there was this other meeting completely unrelated to ArriveCAN. I immediately came to the committee, offered my apologies for not having the agency validate my testimony. I had no recollection of Mr. Firth attending this virtual Teams meeting that had nothing to do with ArriveCAN. And I was not an employee or of the agency at that time, so I was not paid to do anything at that point in time. It was a correction. It was an error in terms of what I recalled, and that's the end of the story. It's nothing more than that.
Did you work directly with Diane Daly?
I have no recollection of working directly with Diane Daly. She was in the Information Science Technology branch.
Do you know if she was involved in procurement or contracting decisions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Only from what's been revealed in testimony.
Did you learn anything new, or were you at all surprised by any of Kristen Firth's responses before the House last month?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have many thoughts on Mr. Firth's response and his appearance before the House, but nothing of relevance to this committee.
Would you even like to share some thoughts?
I'm fine, thank you, Mr. Chair.
When did you begin working for PricewaterhouseCoopers?
I started with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Mr. Chair, in August of 2022.
And what is your role there?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my classification is a managing director, and I provide strategic advice to the organization.
Does this position involve any engagement with the federal government?
Mr. Chair, just to be clear, I was subject to all kinds of post-employment conflict of interest requirements, which I've always scrupulously maintained and adhered to. I have very limited interact directly with government clients. I'm more of a back office strategic advisor support person.
There are no other post-employment limitations?
I still am subject to all kinds of limitations in terms of lobbying and things like that, but I had a 1-year cooling off period. I'm not allowed to switch sides. They're all outlined in the Conflict of Interest Act, and my initial employment with the firm was approved by the Conflict of Interest Commissioner.
Do you agree with the Auditor General's recommendations on this report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not for me to disagree. The agency has agreed with them and are putting in steps to make the appropriate changes.
So looking back, do you have any recommendations of your own to improve the procurement process?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The procurement process is a very, very complicated regime, for lack of better words. And I think that there is room for improvements in these types of things as a result of what we've discovered through the committee's work on ArriveCAN.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'm really not a specialist in procurement. I think there's always room for things to be better. I think that the government will always need the support of the private sector as it's trying to do transformative and big systems changes. And I think that finding a cooperative way forward would behoove both industry and the government.
Is there anything else you would like to finish off
That's it.
in terms of your testimony here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yip. Just a question. You had mentioned, and I think this is believable, that if wrongdoing had been sent to you, you would have acted on it. But you said something at the top which was interesting, which is the auditor found systems were in place, they were not followed. So who's responsible? That's what we're trying to get at here. You were in a unique position to be responsible. In fact, you said you were the person responsible, but you were proud of the work. So can you answer that question for us? Who is responsible for rules that were in place to ensure tax dollars are wisely spent and accounted for, but the system broke down internally? Is it officials under you, or was it officials over you?
Monsieur le Président. On a point of order, Mr. Chair. Yes, go ahead. I don't know. I'm new to this committee, but does the chair of a committee, does the chair of a committee participate in the questioning? Yes, this is a practice. The chair can ask certain questions. It's been in place for quite some time. And normally, though, they are not partisan questions. Well, I just don't know. So my answer is yes, I am entitled to ask short questions. Is it partisan? Is it partisan or not? I didn't understand. I have the privilege of asking questions.
Please do. Thank you.
So my responsibilities as the accounting officer are laid out in Section 16 of the FAA. With respect to some of the findings that you're referring to, those are delegated down into the organization. And ultimately, the person who signs off on Section 34 of the FAA is attesting to the fact that the goods or services have been received. Whoever has that delegated authority, the manager that oversees that person, are the people responsible for those decisions based on the delegations that have been given to them and the requirements under the FAA.
And here's my last question. So I've worked on the executive side. What kind of pressure were you under, in your department under, from the Privy Council office to get this done? I can certainly see how the nonpartisan Privy Council office would be tremendously worried about cross-border relations, given what the what the U.S. administration was signaling on travel border. What kind of pressures was the department under to just get this done? Damn the torpedoes! We need to have this done immediately. And did that have an impact on rule following internally? That's my last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't recall any direction from the Privy Council office to get this done, and that it wasn't. It was really us just trying to help the public health agency do their part. Obviously, we were a key lever there in terms of advising them about what was operationally possible at the border, because we were the experts of how the border works. But in terms of the information that they wanted and how they chose to proceed with the orders in council, there was no pressure on us. There were times when they wanted to do something faster, and we told them that it simply was not possible to do it that fast because of the complexity of the changes would be required. So it was very cooperative, but it was done very quickly.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ossowski, for your testimony today and your participation in relation to study of Report 1, ArriveCAN. Vous pouvez soumettre des informations supplémentaires.
You can give us written information. If you have any other additional information, submit it, please, to the clerk.
Before we bring our next witness, the witness is excused, and I suspend for 5. Thank you.
Hey everybody, we should be back in 5 minutes. Anyone new to the channel, please like and subscribe to help beat the algorithm. It seems to be suppressing conservative Canadian content. So don't forget to like and subscribe. Share the content with your friends, social media, whatever. You can also help support the channel by purchasing a super chat or a sticker, and you can even become a member of the channel. So just bear with us for 5 minutes. Go take a bathroom break, make a coffee, have a smoke, whatever you want to do, grab a snack, and we should be back going here in a few minutes. Wow, this is extremely boring. Anyone new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Yeah, to elaborate on the poll a little bit, this channel has been suppressed big time. We went from around 800,000 views to 15,000 views, and it gets shared with almost nobody. So most of the people that watch the content are already subscribed, but YouTube's not sharing it with new members. And it's happening to a lot of conservative Canadian content.
I've made a commitment to have this very brief and even subject to everyone's agreement to proceed with it. This is an issue that Madame Sinclair raised with me. I'll speak to it, and then turn things over to her. This is in regard to information provided by the TBS on April 15th. We've received media requests to have these documents shared. The documents were distributed to members, and they themselves are not confidential. We can choose to publish them on our website or look at adopting routine motion in regards to how to treat these types of requests given the number of documents we receive. Maybe we won't have a long discussion unless members want to, but Madame Sinclair, would you like to address this, since I know you had raised it with the clerk and myself? Vous êtes en sourdine.
Oui. You're muted. Yes. It seems quite clear for those who are following the ArriveCAN matter, and in the light of Monday morning's article in the Globe and Mail, that the documents were sent to the committee on April 15 were received by the Globe and Mail. Those documents, to be very clear, those were answers to questions, as many witnesses do in the public arena. These were written responses that were sent by the witnesses in the public arena. They were obtained by a journalist, and by that very fact, data in those documents were made public, despite consent of the committee. And I find it to be unfortunate, I have to say. I think that we have to repair the situation by the first reason why I want to see these documents withdrawn is that they were published in English, and I think that the Francophone world should also have access to these Treasury Board documents that were published by the Globe and Mail. Francophone journalists should be able to peruse them. And secondly, I think that it's a matter of fairness for media. This is the fourth pillar of a democracy, is it not? Those documents, therefore, because they were a leak to a specific newspaper agency, should be translated. I'd like to have the opinion of the committee on this matter. I think it's very important that we repair the error. Those documents should be just posted, translated on the website of the committee. And here again, I'm saying that it's the documents dated that arise from April the 15th about conflict of interest, and also the amounts that were granted over the past 15 years at least, and that includes quite a number of years of the government to GC strategies. So those two documents I want to be made public, since there has been most of the information leaked to the Globe and Mail.
To summarize then, a motion to have these documents that were shared with members put on our website. My view was that when they were made public, they should be released to anyone that asked for them. The clerk recommended that I hold on that, so to bring it back to the committee, but it is something I think should be redressed. Ms. Khalid, you have your hand up. The floor is yours, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and I really appreciate Madame Sinclair de Gagné for raising this this very important point. I, for one, would really like to know who in our committee is leaking these documents, and who in any committee is leaking documents that are supposed to be confidential, that are supposed to maintain the respect of the decorum of our committees, and I'm hoping that we can find the answers to those questions. And if Madame Sinclair de Gagné has those answers, I would love for her to answer them. But I think this is a very important point, in that we must always maintain the decorum of our committees, Chair. And I know that I've raised this with you and in many ways on many different points to ensure that that each and every one of us are respecting how our committees are operating. Because if we don't operate effectively, if we don't respect the democratic values that govern our committees, then we're not doing our country much of a service, to be honest. So I would love to understand exactly what happened here before we, go into the depth of Madame Sinclair de Gagné's motion. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Drouin, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci.
Thank you. I just want to say that I agree with what Madame Sinclair de Gagné has said. I'm sure it's not Madame Sinclair Gagné herself who is the source of the leak, because it wasn't a Francophone journalist who wrote this. But we have to respect the committee and its orders. We have to respect the committee, as I say, and I agree with Madame Khalid that we have to try to find out what the source was, in a sense, to be able to ensure that documents are safeguarded. I'm not making any accusation, but I mean, the leak was to an Anglophone journalist. I have some difficulty seeing if there is going to be a leak. There should be equal rights for French and English journalists. Madame Sinclair Gagné. I'd just like to answer Madame Khalid's question. We don't know, and maybe we'll never know who leaked these documents. That wasn't the substance of my motion. My motion is intended to see that the committee remains honorable and maintains confidentiality, not making these documents public. But that being the case, they have been released, and I think they should be posted to the website so we can just have this issue of balance in English and French dealt with.
I saw your hand up. Do you have a comment to make? Just in the meantime, Madame Sinclair de Gagné, could you just read out your motion, please, s'il vous plaît? I will certainly give you. Je vais vous donner du temps à trouver.
I'll give you time to find the motion. Yes, in French. In view of the fact that information contained in the written information submitted by the Treasury Board Secretariat on April 15th, 2024, appears to have been leaked to a journalist of the Globe and Mail in an article, three firms tied to contracts, which was published on May 13th, 2024. I move that these documents dated April 15th from Treasury Board should be posted.
So I'm not seeing more hands. Ms. Khalid, puis Mr. Drouin, our normal clerk, our regular clerk, is not here today to kind of maybe give us an update on what happen, at least behind the scenes. I'm not in a position to do so as well. So I guess I'm looking for the committee on how to proceed. Do we want to deal with Madame Sinclair de Gagné's motion to release these documents and a question of alors qu'ils sont disponibles en anglais puis aussi en français?
To make them available in English and in French, 2 points that were put forward by her today.
I can have a discussion at another time about a protocol, because it did put the chair in an awkward position where documents were available to some, but not all. Yes, Ms. Khalid.
Thank you very much, Chair. I am very agreeable to the main motion. I think that it is unfortunately lacking a big aspect as to why we are in this position right now, and I think that we should amend the motion to investigate who released these documents and give discretion to the chair to deal with the repercussions accordingly. Because I do think this is a very serious issue. We abide ourselves by very stringent rules as to what is in camera, what kind of sensitive documents are presented to us, and how we study them. And you know, like I used to sit on the International Human Rights Subcommittee, where release of documents or release of names of witnesses would often mean the severe security and safety of the witnesses that came before our committee. And I think that protecting the sanctity of what is presented to our committee is very, very important. And as a Public Accounts Committee, I think it is incumbent upon us to really investigate this matter and to figure out why this happened, who did it, and what are the consequences. And I sincerely believe, Chair, that there should be consequences to this.
Oui, Madame Sinclair Desgagne.
Madame Sinclair Desgagne. Oh.
Point of order. Did Ms.
Yes.
Kelly move a specific amendment, or was she making suggestions? Because if she moved,
no, Chair, I moved a specific amendment.
Yeah. So, I'm in a position here where I am certainly open to hearing more about this. I consulted the clerk on it. I don't want to speak for her, and so I'm going to nudge the committee to push this off and deal with it when the clerk is here to kind of speak to what is considered in-camera confidential information and what it is not. From my view, both in discussion with the clerk and as a matter of practice, a response to a question is certainly not a response to a public question is certainly not in-camera sensitive. Now, having said that, there's no doubt that information provided to members is committee business, but this is not at the level of a report being made public. Having said that, we can discuss this, but I do think we should hear from the clerk before we proceed too far down this path. I've got Madame Sinclair Desgagne. Ms. Khalid, is your hand up again, or is that a previous hand? Oh, yes, okay. So, Madame Sinclair Desgagne, puis après ça, Mr. Barrett. Oui, Madame Sinclair Desgagne.
Yes, Madame Sinclair Desgagne. Chair, I think we're getting bogged down in the weeds here. The motion's very clear. There is no problem with the fact that if the motion is approved, that the documents could be posted on the website. This issue, I think, should be dealt with as quickly as possible. If there's a matter of procedure, any clerk can answer any questions we have, I am sure, if it's a question about general procedure. But I'm not particularly in agreement with the amendment, but I'm going to wait to hear what the Conservatives have to say with respect to my original motion and how to proceed on it.
And Mr. Barrett is up.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. So to the main motion, we support the motion.
Okay.
With respect to the secondary issue raised by Ms. Khalid, having heard your comments, I mean, notionally that's fine. I think that I defer to the chair's suggestion, and so would want to put that off as a separate issue until the clerk returns. But generally speaking, the issue of that the chair report back to the committee following an investigation of the particular circumstances, that's fine. But if we could deal with the main motion, and then if we have an agreement, a consensus, to just direct the chair and the clerk to be prepared to report back to the committee at its next sitting, I think that's great. It achieves both objectives. It satisfies the intent of, it satisfies exactly Madame Sinclair Desgagne's her motion, but it will also then chart us to the right place. We'll hear from the clerk through the chair at the next meeting, and then if more steps are then required, then generally speaking, then we'd be supportive of that. But let's deal with the main motion. We'll support that. The spirit of what Ms. Khalid is asking, that's fine. But if we can hear from the clerk and then vote on that as a separate issue, that would be our preference.
Thank you, Mr. Genuis. And then I see Ms. Khalid after that. Mr. Genuis, go ahead.
I'll strike, Chair.
Ms. Khalid.
Thank you, Chair. And, like this hour, as you had scheduled, was supposed to be for a witness who I'm not sure what happened there. I was able to hear her very clearly sitting in Mississauga Erin Mills. So really wondering, how those technical issues occurred. But I do believe that my amendment, as I have proposed and moved, is a big part of the motion that Madame Sinclair Dingagnier has moved. So I take your advice, Chair, and I think that we should perhaps wait until our clerk is back in this committee. And so, in so doing, taking your advice, Chair, I move that this meeting do now adjourn.
All right, we'll do a roll call. Move to adjourn. Or sorry, that's a roll call and move to adjourn. I'm not declaring it adjourned yet.
Adjourn the meeting.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just a second here. Madame Châtel.
I vote yes.
Monsieur Drouin.
En faveur.
Okay. Mr. Hardy. Mr. Hardy? Okay. Ms. Khalid?
Yes.
Ms. Yip?
Yes.
Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Ms. Block? Ms. Block?
Who's that?
Ms. Block. She's online, but
Just skip it.
yeah. Mr. Brock?
Yes.
Madame Sinclair Dingagnier?
Non.
Mr. Cannings?
No.
7 yeas, 2 nays.
This meeting is adjourned. We'll see you on Tuesday. Have a nice long weekend and happy Victoria Day.
All right, everybody. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. I think I've said that like 4 times already, but you never know who comes in that's new. There is something tomorrow, I believe. I'll have to take a look anyway, if there's any meetings for tomorrow. Actually, I can do that right now. Let everybody know. Oh, so there is no meetings tomorrow. So everybody have a wonderful long weekend, and we will be back. Looks like Tuesday. So the House of Commons will be running, so I won't be playing any committees. I will be streaming the House of Commons live. So we will be back to our regular streaming come Tuesday. So everyone have a good long weekend, and don't forget to like and subscribe.